Ethan Cole had spent most of his life riding from one dusty town to another, never staying long enough to call any place home. His clothes were worn, his boots covered with dust, and his horse looked as tired as he did. The open land was beautiful but lonely, and that loneliness had started to weigh heavy on his heart. He wasn't a young man anymore, and the road felt longer each day. All he wanted now was a quiet piece of land where he could rest, raise a few animals, and watch the sunset in peace. One hot afternoon, Ethan stopped in a small town called Dry Creek. It was one of those places that seemed forgotten by time. A few wooden buildings stood along the main street, and the air smelled of dust and dry hay. He tied his horse outside the saloon and went inside for a drink of water. Inside, an old man sat at the counter, reading a worn-out newspaper. When Ethan asked if anyone knew about land for sale, the old man looked up with a grin. "You looking for land, stranger?" the old man asked. Ethan nodded. "Something small, a place I can fix up." The man leaned closer and whispered, "There's an old ranch just outside town. Belonged to a fella who left years ago. Folks say the land's empty now. I'll sell it to you for $50 if you're serious." $50. It was almost nothing, even for an old ranch. Ethan frowned, thinking it sounded too easy. "Why so cheap?" he asked. The man shrugged. "Nobody wants it. They say it's cursed or haunted or something. I don't believe in such talk. You want it or not?" Ethan thought for a moment. He had spent years chasing good luck that never came. Maybe this was his chance to stop running. "I'll take it," he said finally, placing the few bills he had on the counter. The old man wrote out a quick bill of sale on a piece of paper and handed it over. That night, Ethan slept in the stable behind the saloon, dreaming about his new home. He imagined wide fields, maybe a small creek, and a porch where he could sit and drink coffee in the mornings. For the first time in a long while, he felt a little hope. At sunrise, he saddled his horse and rode toward the land. The road was long and rough, lined with dry bushes and red rocks. After a few miles, he saw the ranch in the distance, a small wooden house standing between two hills with a broken fence and a windmill that barely turned. It looked quiet, maybe too quiet. Still, to Ethan, it was beautiful. It was his. He dismounted, tied his horse to a post, and walked toward the porch. The door creaked open with a soft sound. Dust covered the floor, and sunlight fell through the cracks in the roof. He set down his bag, rolled up his sleeves, and started cleaning. But as he swept the floor, he heard something but a soft rustle like footsteps. He froze, listening. The sound came from behind the house. He stepped outside slowly, and that's when he saw them. 3 women stood a few yards away, watching him silently. Their clothes were simple, their faces calm but unreadable. They didn't move, and neither did he. For a long moment, only the wind spoke between them. Ethan took off his hat and said softly, "I didn't mean to trespass. I bought this place yesterday. Name's Ethan Cole." The oldest woman, tall and strong with long dark hair, spoke first. Her voice was steady. "This land is not empty," she said. "We live here." Ethan blinked, surprised. "Live here? But I was told no one was here anymore." The woman's expression didn't change. "The man who sold it to you had no right to do so. This land belonged to our family long before his." Ethan's heart sank. He looked at the broken fence and the half-collapsed barn, suddenly unsure of everything. "I see," he said quietly. "Maybe there's been a mistake." The second woman, younger and sharper in her gaze, stepped forward slightly. "You are not like the others who come here," she said. "You speak with respect. Most just shout and leave." "I don't want trouble," Ethan said. "I just wanted a place to stay. If this land is yours, then I'll move on." The oldest woman, Naya, studied him for a moment. "You can stay for now," she said finally. "But we will watch you." Ethan nodded gratefully. "That's fair." For the next few days, he kept his distance. He repaired the fence, cleaned the barn, and fetched water from the well. He noticed that the 3 women, Naya, Tala, and the youngest, Lita, stayed mostly together, working quietly on their side of the land. Sometimes he saw smoke rising from their small cooking fire. Sometimes he heard them singing softly in a language he didn't understand. Though they rarely spoke, Ethan always greeted them kindly. He shared food when he could, leaving it near their porch without saying much. One evening, Lita, the youngest, came to his door holding a basket of corn and beans. "For you," she said shyly. Ethan smiled, touched by the gesture. "Thank you," he said. "That's kind of you." From that moment, things began to change slowly. The silence between them started to soften. Naya would occasionally ask him to help fix something. The roof of their hut, the old well's handle. In return, they would share meals, simple but warm. Ethan learned that they had lived on this land for many years, even after most of their people had moved away. It was all they had left of their family's history. One evening, as the sun painted the sky orange and gold, Ethan sat on the porch with Naya. The air smelled of wood smoke and wild sage. "You must miss your people," he said quietly. Naya looked toward the distant hills. "Yes," she said softly. "But this land holds their memory. We keep it alive." Ethan nodded. "Maybe I can help. I don't want to take what's yours. Maybe we can share it." Naya looked at him with calm eyes. "We will see, cowboy. Words are easy. Time will tell what is in your heart." In the days that followed, Ethan worked harder than ever. He fixed the barn roof, planted new seeds in the dry soil, and repaired the windmill so it could draw water again. The women watched him quietly, slowly realizing he meant no harm. Tala, the second woman, began to speak to him more. She was sharp and cautious but honest. "You are different," she said one day while they were mending a fence together. "Most men come here to take. You build." Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe because I've lost too much already. Building feels better than taking." As the weeks passed, they began to live almost like one small community. Ethan's mornings were filled with work, his evenings with the quiet comfort of shared food and laughter. Sometimes Lita would bring flowers from the hills to decorate the table. Sometimes Naya would tell short stories from her people's past, her voice calm like a river, but peace never comes without whispers. Word soon reached the nearby town that the new ranch owner was living alongside 3 Apache women. Some people laughed, others frowned, but Ethan paid no mind. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of belonging, something he hadn't known he was missing. Still, he knew this fragile peace could be broken easily. The land had a story older than his own, and he was only a small part of it. Yet every time he looked out across the golden fields at sunset, he felt grateful. Maybe, just maybe, he had found what he'd been searching for all his life. Not just a home, but a place where understanding could grow. Little did Ethan know, the true test of that understanding was still to come. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Life at the ranch slowly took on a rhythm that felt almost peaceful. Ethan would wake early, feed the animals, and mend the fences while the sun rose over the red hills. The 3 women, Naya, Tala, and Lita, would gather herbs, tend their small garden, and cook simple meals that filled the air with a soft, comforting smell. They had learned to share their space without needing many words. Ethan respected their traditions, and in return they respected his quiet kindness. He had stopped feeling like an outsider. The old loneliness that once followed him everywhere had started to fade away, but not everyone was happy about it. In town, people had begun to talk. Some called him foolish, saying he had lost his senses living out there with those women. A few even said he had been tricked. Ethan ignored them, but the gossip reached the ranch like a cold wind. One afternoon, Ethan rode into town to buy supplies. When he walked into the store, the room went silent for a moment. The shopkeeper, Mr. Reddick, gave him a long look before handing over his order. "Heard you got company out there," he said with a half-smile. Ethan nodded calmly. "Good folks. They were here before me." Reddick shook his head. "You'd do better staying clear of their kind, Cole. That land's been trouble since the start." Ethan didn't argue. He just packed his supplies, paid what he owed, and left. He had learned that sometimes silence speaks louder than words. When he got back to the ranch, he found Lita sitting by the well, weaving a basket. She looked up and smiled shyly. "You went to town?" she asked. He nodded. "Just for a few things." "How's everyone?" "Fine," she said softly. Then, after a pause, she added, "People in town. They don't like that we live here." Ethan sighed. "I know, but that's their problem, not ours." Her eyes brightened a little at his words. For Lita, who had grown up seeing strangers treat her people unfairly, his kindness meant more than she could say. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, Ethan sat outside mending a saddle. Naya joined him, her face calm but thoughtful. "You went to town," she said, her tone more a statement than a question. "Yes," Ethan replied. "They talk, but it doesn't matter to me." Naya studied him quietly. "Words can hurt even if you do not listen to them. You must be careful, Ethan Cole. Some people fear what they do not understand." He nodded slowly. Maybe so. But fear doesn't make them right. Naya gave a small smile. You speak with courage. My father used to say courage and kindness are brothers. They live together in the same heart. The evening wind blew softly, carrying the sound of the windmill turning. For a long moment they both sat in silence, each lost in thought. The next day, Ethan decided to start planting a proper garden behind the house. The land was dry, but he believed with care it could bloom again. Lida and Tala helped him dig the soil while Naya prepared seeds they had saved from past harvests. As they worked side by side, laughter began to fill the air. Lida teased Ethan about how slowly he dug, and he pretended to argue back. Even Tala, who rarely smiled at first, began to joke a little. It felt like family, an unusual one perhaps, but a family all the same. One night a strong wind swept across the land. The sky darkened and soon heavy clouds rolled over the hills. A sandstorm was coming. Naya stepped out of her small house and called out, "The wind is changing. We must cover the windows." Ethan ran to the barn to tie down what he could. Dust stung his eyes and the air grew thick. The wind howled, shaking the old buildings. Inside, the women tried to keep the fire from dying while Lida held onto the door so it wouldn't blow open. "Stay back," Ethan shouted as he ran to help. Together, he and Naya pushed a wooden board against the window as the wind beat against it like a wild beast. Hours passed before the storm finally began to calm. When it was over, the land looked different. The fences had fallen, the barn roof had broken again, and sand covered half the field. They were tired, covered in dust, but safe. Ethan looked around at the wreckage and felt a strange peace inside. Despite the damage, they had faced it together. The next morning, as sunlight returned to the sky, they began to clean and rebuild. Ethan repaired the roof while Tala gathered what could be saved. Naya cooked food for everyone, and Lida sang softly while she swept sand from the porch. There was no anger or complaint, only quiet determination. That night, they shared a simple meal by the fire. Ethan looked at the three women, his heart full of gratitude. "I'm glad I wasn't alone," he said softly. "I couldn't have done it without you." Lida smiled shyly. "You are not alone anymore," she said. Her words stayed in his heart long after the fire went out. Over the next few months, the ranch began to change. The garden grew green with beans and corn. The barn was fixed better than before. Even the windmill turned steadily again. Travelers who passed by would sometimes stop for water or food, and Ethan always made sure to say, "This is our ranch." One evening, Naya sat on the porch with Ethan, watching the sky turn pink and gold. "You have done good things here," she said. "When you came, I thought you would be like the others, taking what you wanted. But you gave instead." Ethan shook his head. "You gave me something too," he said quietly. "A reason to stay. A reason to care again." Naya smiled gently. "Maybe we were all searching for something, and we found it here." In time, the people in town began to see things differently. A few who had once mocked Ethan came to ask for his help fixing their fences or trading crops. They saw that his life with the women was peaceful and honest. Slowly, the gossip faded away. Years later, Dry Creek began to grow again. New families moved in, and travelers stopped by the ranch more often. Everyone knew the story of the cowboy who bought a ranch for $50 and found something far more valuable than land. He found friendship, trust, and a home. Sometimes, when children asked about the three women, Ethan would smile and say, "They were my teachers. They taught me that a man's worth isn't in what he owns, but how he treats others." In his old age, Ethan would sit under the big tree near the house, watching the garden sway in the wind. The sound of laughter still filled the air, echoes of the women who had once turned a stranger's land into a shared home. The ranch, once dry and broken, now bloomed with life, a living memory of what kindness could build. Even the birds seemed to know that this place carried peace. They nested in the barn, sang in the mornings, and circled high above as if guarding it. Ethan often looked up at the sky and thought about how far he had come. He had arrived as a lonely man, chasing hope across the empty plains. But he stayed because he found something greater, understanding. And in the quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the grass, Ethan Cole would smile and whisper to himself, $50 for a ranch. But what I found here was worth more than gold.